Friday night, March 2023. I pulled into the driveway of my 2-story home in San Mateo, just outside San Francisco, and sat there for a few seconds before cutting the engine. The lights inside were already on. Warm, steady, and utterly foreign. It used to feel like coming home. Now it felt like stepping into a place that didn't belong to me anymore. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. When I opened the door, the familiar smell of lasagna hit me. My mother, Susan, was humming in the kitchen, arranging the dining table like she was the hostess and not the guest. My father, Mark, sat in the living room with a glass of wine, watching golf highlights, muttering something about terrible pudding. Upstairs, I heard Hannah's voice echoing from her phone. She was filming another day in the life video for her struggling influencer channel. I set my briefcase by the door, loosened my scarf, and glanced around. The art on the walls. The floral tablecloth, the heavy curtains. None of it was mine. My mother had redecorated last year, insisting her old furniture made the house feel more like home. I remember laughing at that once. I don't laugh anymore. Dinner's ready. Mom called out as if she owned the place. I joined them at the table. The lasagna looked perfect, her specialty. Mark poured himself more Merlot. Hannah scrolled through her phone, half listening, her nails clicking against the glass. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, we could get through one meal without tension. Then my mother smiled that polite, rehearsed smile. Family helps family. Rachel, you believe that, don't you? I didn't even look up from my plate. Sure, when the people who need help aren't living off you for 3 years? Mark's laugh was short, annoyed. Don't start. Tonight's supposed to be a celebration. Hannah looked up, grinning. Actually, I was waiting to tell you guys Ethan proposed. She held up her hand, letting the diamond catch the light. We're getting married in Napa Valley. Mom clasped her hands together dramatically. Isn't that wonderful? And, of course, she added, glancing at me, you'll help make it happen. Family has to stick together. I set my fork down slowly. Help how? Mark leaned back in his chair. You'll cover the costs, obviously. You're the successful one. It's your duty as the oldest daughter. My stomach tightened. You want me to pay for the entire wedding? He nodded like it was obvious. If you don't want to contribute, then don't bother showing up. You'll be banned from the wedding. I looked at him for a long second. Banned. Hannah smirked, sliding her phone across the table. You've always loved rules, Rachel. Consider this one of the family's... Mom reached for her wine. You can afford it. You make good money, and it's not like you have a husband or kids. What else are you saving for? I felt heat rising behind my ribs. Do you hear yourselves? You've lived in my house for 3 years. You don't pay rent. You've used my car, my electricity, my food. And now you think I owe you $35,000 for a wedding? Dad sighed as if I were being childish. Don't be dramatic. It's an investment in family. You'll understand when you have your own. I already have my own, I said evenly, and it's standing in front of me, taking advantage of me. The silence that followed was sharp. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the muted voice of a sportscaster from the other room. Hannah broke it first. Wow, you really are bitter, huh? No wonder you're single. That one hit hard. She smiled like she'd scored a point. I stood up, took a breath, and forced myself not to shout. If anyone mentions this wedding again, I'll be calling the police. Mark's eyes narrowed. The police? Are you threatening your own family? No, I said calmly, picking up my glass of wine. I'm setting a boundary. Mom slammed her napkin on the table. You've lost your mind, Rachel. I looked at her. Really looked at her. The woman who raised me to say yes to everything, who equated compliance with love. Then I said softly, No, Mom. I just finally found it. I left the table, the sound of their voices rising behind me. Out on the balcony, the air was cold and clear, the kind that cut straight through the noise in your head. The city lights shimmered in the distance, San Francisco glowing faintly under a marine layer. For a moment, I let the silence settle. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't from anger. It was from something else. Clarity, maybe. The first breath of freedom after years of suffocating politeness. Inside, I heard laughter again. Hannah's voice high and sharp. Mark muttered something about ungrateful kids. The sound faded as I closed the balcony door. I leaned against the railing, took a slow sip of wine, and whispered to myself, "Enough." The word lingered in the cool night air, fragile but final. 3 years earlier, they said it would only be for a few months. It was the summer of 2020, the year everything in the world seemed to fall apart, including my family's sense of pride. My dad, Mark, lost his job at a mid-sized accounting firm in Palo Alto after an audit revealed inconsistencies in several client files. My mother, Susan, claimed the stress of it all made her blood pressure spike, and she decided to take early retirement. I remember the phone call like it was yesterday. "Just until your father gets back on his feet," she'd said. "A few months, that's all." They arrived 2 weeks later with 2 suitcases and a car full of boxes like refugees of their own decisions. I didn't hesitate. I carried their things upstairs, changed the sheets in the guest room, and told myself I was doing the right thing. I was their daughter. Helping them felt like the decent thing to do. At first it was almost nice. I worked long hours from home because of the pandemic, and having them around filled the silence. Mom cooked big dinners, Dad watched the news out loud, and for a while I believed we were healing. But then the rearranging began. By the second week, Mom had completely reorganized my kitchen. She replaced my modern dishes with her floral china, rearranged my spices for efficiency, and scolded me for keeping store-brand olive oil. "You're successful now, Rachel," she'd said, pulling open a cabinet. "You should live like it." Dad converted my office into a workspace for his job search, which mostly involved watching golf tutorials on YouTube. The guest room became theirs, and a week later, Mom announced that Hannah would be moving in too. "She just needs a place to stay while she figures things out." Mom explained over breakfast like it was no big deal. When Hannah showed up with her pink luggage set and ring light, she kissed me on the cheek and said, "I promise I'll stay out of your way." Within a day, she claimed the master bedroom because the lighting's better for filming. I moved into the smaller room that used to be my guest space. I slept on a twin bed I'd bought for visiting friends. At night, I could hear Hannah upstairs talking into her phone. "Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're unboxing skincare products." I didn't pay for the first electric bill after they moved in nearly doubled. "It's just the air conditioning," Mom said, waving me off. "Your father can't sleep in the heat." The grocery costs tripled when Dad decided to go organic, and Mom started cooking elaborate meals for family morale. Every time I mentioned money, Mom would pat my hand and say, "Family takes care of family, sweetheart." I remember one night standing at the sink after dinner staring at the mountain of dishes. Mom was behind me drying a plate, humming. I asked quietly, "When do you think you and Dad might be ready to find your own place?" She didn't even look up. "Oh, Rachel, you really don't understand what family means, do you?" That was the first time the thought crossed my mind. I wanted them out, but the guilt came faster. What kind of daughter throws her parents out during a pandemic? So I kept quiet. I paid the bills. Smiled at neighbors who thought it was so sweet that my parents had moved in to help me, and ignored the small things that kept disappearing. Bottles of wine, my hairdryer, my peace of mind. By 2021, things had settled into an ugly rhythm. Dad stopped pretending to job hunt. Mom filled her days reorganizing things that didn't need reorganizing. Hannah's temporary stay turned into a lifestyle. Her YouTube following grew to 20,000 subscribers, mostly teenage girls who believed her apartment setup was her own. I used to listen from the hallway as she said I worked so hard to afford this home office while filming in my master bedroom. One night I was working late when I overheard voices from the living room. I recognized Hannah's sharp tone first, then Mom's lower one. "She's so lucky," Hannah said. "No husband, no kids, no responsibilities. She doesn't even know how easy she has it." Mom sighed. "I know. If she didn't have us, she'd probably go crazy. Some people aren't built to be alone." I sat there frozen, listening to my mother and sister talk about me like I was some charity case in my own house. My laptop screen blurred as I realized how far things had drifted. By early 2023, the bills were out of control. My credit card balance looked wrong, higher than it should have been. One Saturday morning, I logged into my bank account and started tracing transactions. There were multiple charges from a furniture store in Burlingame, thousands of dollars worth. I scrolled down, my pulse pounding, until I saw the note beside one of the purchases. Paid with supplemental card. S. Bennett. My mother had used the secondary card I gave her for emergencies to buy a new vanity table, rugs, and mirrors for Hannah's filming setup. When I confronted her, she smiled calmly and said, "It's all for the house." "It's an investment." I didn't argue. I canceled the card the next day and quietly started separating my accounts. That night, I lay awake on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning overhead. From upstairs came the faint sound of Hannah laughing into her phone recording another vlog. I thought about my mother's words. Family takes care of family. And something in me hardened, because she was right in a way. Family does take care of family. But no one ever said it had to be at the expense of your own dignity. I turned off the light, whispering to the dark. When you keep paying for the people who hurt you, you stop being generous. You start being complicit, and for the first time I started to think about what would happen if I stopped. Monday morning came too early. The city was still gray when I pulled into the underground garage beneath Green and Harlow LLP. The week had barely started, and I already felt like I was running on fumes. Court days always made me nervous even after 8 years of practice. But this case, an elderly widow suing her son for transferring her house deed without consent, hit closer to home than I cared to admit. In the courthouse, the air felt heavy with the sterile scent of polished wood and stale coffee. My client, Mrs. Latham, sat beside me, wringing her hands, her voice trembling as she whispered, "I don't want to hurt him. He's still my boy." I placed a gentle hand over hers. "You're not hurting him, Mrs. Latham. You're standing up for yourself. That's what good mothers do, too." When it was my turn to speak, I stood before the judge, my words steady but sharp. "Your Honor, financial abuse doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people who call you family." The sentence lingered longer than I intended, the echo of it bouncing off the courtroom walls and back into me. I kept my face neutral, but inside I could feel something twist, like my own reflection was standing in the witness box. By the time I got back to the office, I just wanted silence. My assistant handed me a folder. "You killed it out there, Rachel." The judge looked impressed. "Thanks," I said, forcing a smile, though my head was somewhere else entirely. I was halfway through an email when Jennifer, one of the associates, stopped by my desk, eyes wide and hesitant. "Hey, did you see what your mom posted?" I froze. "What?" She lowered her voice. "It's been shared a lot. Some of the partners saw it." My heart started to pound as I unlocked my phone. There it was. Susan Bennett's name right at the top of a Facebook post that already had hundreds of comments. "Sad day when your own daughter thinks the police are the answer to family problems. Some wounds you can't heal with money." The photo attached was worse. An old one from my law school graduation, my arm around her shoulder, both of us smiling. The caption made it look like she was the victim, and I was the heartless, successful daughter who'd abandoned her parents. I scrolled through the comments, hands shaking. Poor woman. Kids these days have no respect. She should be ashamed of herself. Wait, isn't that the lawyer from Green and Harlow? A few people defended me. Friends who knew better, but their words drowned under the noise. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling something cold settle in my chest. It wasn't anger. It was disbelief. They had actually done it. They'd turned me into their villain. Jennifer touched my arm. "I'm so sorry, Rachel. People love a story, even if it's not true." I managed to nod my throat too tight to speak. By 5 o'clock, I couldn't concentrate. The office felt smaller, the walls closing in with every buzz of my phone. My dad's name flashed on the screen once. I let it go to voicemail. When the elevator doors opened into the parking garage, the smell of oil and concrete felt almost comforting. Quiet, familiar, safe. I got into my car and sat there with the engine off, staring at the steering wheel. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Paula Green, one of the partners, and my mentor. I hesitated before answering. "Rachel." She began, her tone kind but firm. "I just wanted to give you a heads up. A journalist from the Bay Chronicle called asking about your family. I told them we don't comment on personal matters, but I suggest you stay quiet for now." I pressed my eyes shut. I didn't expect them to drag my work into this. Unfortunately, Paula said family drama gets clicks, especially when one side knows how to play victim. "Don't engage. Let it burn out. You've worked too hard to get distracted now." Her words were meant to comfort, but they felt like a warning. After we hung up, I sat in silence, the hum of the garage lights filling the emptiness. I opened my photo gallery and scrolled through old pictures. Mom at Thanksgiving. Dad grilling in the backyard. Hannah on her 21st birthday. I used to think those moments were real, that we were happy. Now, every smile looked staged, every hug rehearsed. When people you love decide you're the enemy, every good memory turns toxic. I drove home after dark, the freeway lights stretching out like an endless string of small suns. I didn't play music. I didn't need to. The echo of my mother's words online was loud enough. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house looked calm from the outside. You'd never guess there was a war going on behind those walls. Inside, the TV was blaring Hannah laughing upstairs as if nothing had happened. On the kitchen counter, a new delivery box sat unopened. More camera gear, probably. I ignored it and went straight to my room. I booted up my laptop and opened my bank accounts, my property records, my email. Every file, every document, every receipt. I wanted control back. Proof of what was mine, what I'd built, what I'd paid for. The screen glowed in the dark as I checked transaction after transaction. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, only that I couldn't sleep without knowing where the truth ended and the lies began. Outside, the street was quiet, the air heavy with fog. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed low and mournful. I closed my eyes and whispered to no one, "If they want a story, I'll give them the truth." Then I reached for the folder labeled Property Ownership, Bennett Residence, and placed it on the desk beside me. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what I had to do next. The air inside Dr. Evelyn Chen's office always smelled faintly of sandalwood and lemon tea. The lights were soft, the walls painted a warm cream lined with books about mindfulness and family systems therapy. I sank into the familiar leather chair across from her, clutching a cup of chamomile she'd handed me. So she said, gently crossing one leg over the other, "How are things at home this week?" I laughed under my breath. "That depends. Are we defining home as the building I pay for, or the people who live in it?" Dr. Chen smiled slightly. "Tell me what happened." I told her about the Facebook post, the fallout at work, the dinner confrontation that started it all. When I finished, I stared at the rug, tracing the geometric pattern with my eyes. "I used to think they loved me," I said quietly, "but I think what they really love is the feeling of depending on me. It makes them feel needed, important. If I stop giving, I stop existing to them." Dr. Chen nodded slowly, jotting something in her notebook. "If you were your own client, Rachel, what advice would you give?" I let out a tired laugh. "I'd tell her to file for an eviction. Guests who refuse to leave are trespassing." Her eyes softened. "You already know what's right. You just don't like how it looks." I met her gaze. "It looks cruel." Sometimes she said the kindest thing you can do, for everyone, is what others will call cruel. We sat in silence for a moment. I could hear faint traffic outside, the murmur of life continuing as mine unraveled. Then she asked, "What would happen if you stopped trying to fix them?" I thought about it. They'd fall apart. And if they do, then maybe they'd have to learn how to stand on their own. Dr. Chen nodded. "There's your answer." After the session, I drove straight to the bank in downtown San Mateo. I hadn't checked my accounts since that morning's courthouse session, and something about Dr. Chen's words made me want to take stock, not just of my emotions, but of my life. The bank was quiet, sterile, the kind of place where even air conditioning felt expensive. The young teller looked up as I approached. "Hi, Ms. Bennett. We've been meaning to contact you about some irregular activity." My stomach tightened. "Irregular how?" She tapped at her computer, frowning slightly. "There were several recent transactions linked to a secondary account under your name. Large furniture purchases delivered to your address. Did you authorize that?" I froze. "Secondary account?" "Yes," she said, turning the screen slightly toward me. "Opened 2 months ago. Listed as a joint access account. The other name is Susan Bennett. My mother." I swallowed hard. "She's not authorized. That account shouldn't exist." The teller hesitated. "Would you like me to flag it as fraud?" I nodded. "Yes, immediately." When I left the bank, the afternoon sun felt harsher than usual. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time, cars rushing by, people hurrying home. It struck me how easy it was for my mother to cross a line that wasn't hers, and how easily I'd allowed it. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the anger had cooled into something else, resolve. I stepped inside quietly, the faint smell of new wood polish greeting me before I even reached the living room. There, in the middle of the floor, stood a brand new coffee table, 2 armchairs, and a gleaming vanity with gold trim. My mother was crouched beside one of the boxes, peeling off a shipping label. "Do you like it?" she asked without looking up. I thought the living room needed a refresh. I stared at the furniture, then at her. "Did you buy all this with my money?" She glanced up, unbothered. "It's still our home, Rachel. I just moved some things around." "That's not what I asked." Her expression shifted defensive now. You have plenty, sweetheart. I just used what was available. I'm your mother. I shouldn't have to ask permission to make the house nicer. I felt the heat rising in my throat. You opened an account under my name without telling me. That's fraud, Mom. She waved a hand dismissively. Oh, don't use your lawyer talk with me. I gave you life, Rachel. You think a few dollars give you the right to talk down to me? I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Giving me life doesn't mean you own it. She blinked, taken aback by the calm in my tone. You're being dramatic. No, I said quietly. I'm being clear. Dad walked in from the kitchen holding a mug of coffee. What's all this? Your wife, I said, pointing to the furniture, used my personal information to open a bank account and spend thousands of dollars. He frowned at me. You're overreacting. She was just trying to make the place feel like home. I laughed softly, shaking my head. That's the problem. It already had one. You just pushed me out of it. Hannah appeared at the top of the stairs, phone in hand, recording. Are you seriously yelling at Mom about money? That's so messed up. I turned toward her. You can delete that video right now, she scoffed. It's my house too. That did it. Something inside me snapped, not in anger, but in finality. No, Hannah. It's not. None of you live here anymore. You're just staying because I let you. The room went silent. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator again, the faint tick of the clock on the wall. Mom's voice broke the quiet. You've changed, Rachel. You used to care about family. I looked at her, really looked at her, and said I still do. That's why I'm finally drawing the line. She shook her head, muttering as she walked away. Ungrateful. Always ungrateful. I didn't follow her. I just stood there, surrounded by furniture I didn't buy in a house that no longer felt like mine, realizing that the people inside it never understood what boundaries meant. When you spend your life giving people stop seeing it as kindness, they start seeing it as their right. That night, I sat in my car in the driveway long after the lights inside went out, staring at the glow of the dashboard. For the first time, the anger didn't consume me. It focused me. If they wanted to live off me forever, they'd soon learn what it felt like to face someone who knew the law better than they knew manipulation. Tomorrow, I promised myself I'd stop letting guilt make my choices. It was close to midnight when my phone buzzed on the nightstand, the glow of the screen cutting through the dark. Grandma Margaret. FaceTime. I hesitated before answering. My grandmother didn't call late unless something was wrong. I slid my finger across the screen, and her wrinkled face appeared framed by the soft light of her bedside lamp. She looked tired, but her eyes, sharp as ever, studied me carefully. Hi, Grandma, I said, forcing a small smile. She tilted her head. You look exhausted, sweetheart. Have you been sleeping at all? I tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. Not much. Her tone softened. I've been hearing things. Your mother called me earlier. She says you threatened to call the police on them. I swallowed hard. Not yet, but I've thought about it. Grandma leaned back, her silver hair catching the light. Your mother's version makes you sound like a monster. That doesn't surprise me. I rubbed my temples. She's good at rewriting stories. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. The only sound was the faint tick of her clock behind her. Then she asked quietly, Are you safe, Rachel? Yes, I said. Just angry, confused, and tired of being the villain in my own house. Her eyes softened. You know, when your mother was your age, she used that phrase too. Family helps family. She said it when your grandfather and I refused to co-sign her first credit card. It's the prettiest trap I ever heard. I frowned. A trap. She nodded slowly. It sounds noble, doesn't it? But what it really means is, you help me no matter the cost. I learned that the hard way. I stared at her through the screen, suddenly feeling like a child again. I'm scared, Grandma. If I make them leave, everyone's going to think I'm cruel. Selfish. The daughter who turned on her parents. She smiled sadly. Sweetheart, guilt is how they keep you where they want you. You're not cruel. You're just done being used. I blinked back tears. I hate that it's come to this. I wish they saw how much I've already given. They'll never see it, she said gently. Some people only see what you stop giving, not what you gave. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I watched her wrinkled hands adjust her blanket, the delicate tremor in her fingers. There was something grounding about the way she moved, slow, certain, unashamed of the time she took to think before she spoke. Peace isn't betrayal, darling, she said finally. You're not punishing them. You're saving yourself. The words cracked something open inside me. I covered my mouth, trying to hold back the sob that slipped through. I just don't want them to hate me, I whispered. She looked at me with that steady maternal patience that always disarmed me. Maybe they will, but that's their problem to live with. You've been carrying theirs long enough. I wiped my face, feeling the tears dry against my skin. What if I lose them completely? Then you'll have space, she said softly. And space is where you'll finally breathe. Her breathing grew heavier, slower. I'm proud of you, Rachel. Even if they never say it, I will. I smiled through the lump in my throat. Thank you, Grandma. Now get some rest, she murmured. And remember, doing the right thing doesn't always look kind. We said goodnight, and I stared at the dark screen long after the call ended. The quiet in the house felt different that night, not peaceful, but charged like a storm gathering behind the walls. Before I could set the phone down, an email notification appeared on the screen. From Margaret Ellis. Subject: For when you need reminding. I opened it. Just one line sat in the center of the page. If they can't learn that love is respect, let the law teach them instead. My hands trembled slightly as I read it again. Grandma had always believed in second chances and forgiveness in faith, but she was also the one who taught me that love without boundaries wasn't love. It was servitude. I sat by the window watching the first streaks of dawn touch the sky over the quiet neighborhood. The fog was thin, rolling gently past the streetlights. The house was still. Upstairs, Hannah's door was shut. I could hear Dad's faint snoring down the hall, the same steady rhythm that once made me feel safe when I was little. I thought of Grandma's hands, the way they'd trembled slightly when she reached for her tea. She'd lived long enough to see every kind of heartbreak, and somehow she still sounded certain about what peace looked like. Peace, I realized, wasn't about quiet houses or polite smiles. It was about reclaiming the parts of yourself you gave away to keep everyone else comfortable. The sun broke through the blinds, lighting up the desk where I kept my files. The folder marked Property Ownership. Bennett Residence sat on top, waiting. I rested my palm on it. For once, I didn't feel angry. I felt ready. The warmth of the morning light spread across the room, and I whispered, almost to myself, "Thank you, Grandma." Outside, the day began. Birds on the fence, a car starting down the block. I closed the laptop, gently exhaling a long, steady breath. The decision had been made. I just hadn't said it out loud yet. Hannah texted me on a Wednesday morning with a cheery message that felt rehearsed. Family meeting tonight. Everyone at 6 p.m. Ethan will be there too. Let's talk like adults. I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back. Fine. I already knew what talk like adults meant in my family. 3 people cornering one until they got what they wanted. When I got home that evening, the living room looked unnaturally neat. Candles lit wine glasses set out Mom's favorite cheese platter in the center of the table. The kind of fake calm that comes before a storm. Hannah sat on the couch beside Ethan, her engagement ring catching the light every time she moved her hand. Dad stood by the window, drink in hand, staring out at the yard like he was practicing a speech. "Rachel," he Buddy said, his voice carefully measured. "Thanks for coming. Let's sit down." I sat in the armchair across from them, setting my briefcase beside me. My heels clicked on the hardwood floor louder than I intended. I noticed Mom's eyes narrow slightly at the sound. Mark cleared his throat. "We're all upset, I know. But this fighting has gone on too long. We're family, and family needs to find peace." Mom folded her arms. "Peace doesn't come from lawyers, Rachel. It comes from humility. You've made me look like a fool to our friends. Who threatens their own parents?" I kept my tone level. "I haven't threatened anyone. I said if things don't change, I'll act according to the law. That's not a threat. It's a boundary." She scoffed. "Boundaries. That's your therapist talking." Hannah jumped in before I could answer. "Look, this whole thing has gotten out of control. You're turning something simple into a crisis. We're just asking you to help pay for the wedding. You can afford it, Rachel." I met her eyes. "You mean I can afford it so you don't have to?" Ethan, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Maybe there's been some misunderstanding. I think Rachel just needs to see that they're coming from a good place." I turned toward him slowly. "Good intentions don't come with a bill attached, Ethan." He blinked, caught off guard. "I didn't mean—" I cut him off gently. "I know. But this isn't about a misunderstanding. It's about entitlement." Dad's voice rose slightly. "Watch your tone. You've always been so damn ungrateful. We gave you everything. I looked at him, my voice calm but sharp. No, Dad. You gave me life. The rest, I built myself. Mom's face flushed. You think your success gives you the right to humiliate us? Humiliate you, I said, leaning forward. You moved into my house, took over my space, used my money, and told people you were helping me through hard times. Tell me who's humiliating who. The air snapped tight. Hannah's voice rose brittle and trembling. If you can't pay for the wedding, fine. But don't come acting all superior. You're not even invited now. I tilted my head, studying her. Perfect. That saves me the trouble of saying no. Her face twisted in disbelief. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. I won't be at your wedding, Hannah. And if this household doesn't return to normal, meaning my home, my rules, I'll be calling the police. The silence that followed was electric. I could feel my pulse in my throat steady and calm. Mom shot to her feet. You would call the cops on your own family. You've lost your mind. I stood, too, meeting her gaze evenly. No, Mom. I've just stopped letting you live in mine. Dad slammed his palm on the table, making the wine glasses rattle. You'll regret this, Rachel. Family doesn't turn on family. My voice didn't waver. I'm not turning on anyone. I'm just done being used. Ethan tried to interject, but Hannah snapped at him. Don't defend her. Her voice cracked, the calm influencer mask finally slipping. She's jealous, that's what this is. She can't stand that I'm getting married. I almost laughed, jealous. Of what exactly? A wedding you can't afford, paid for by people you manipulate. Her face went red. You're such a bitch, Mom gasped. Hannah, but I just smiled faintly. That's the most honest thing you've said all night. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the steady ticking of the clock above the fireplace. Then Dad picked up his glass again, his jaw tight. If you call the cops, you're no daughter of mine. I took a slow breath. Then I guess you should start getting used to that idea. I turned toward the doorway. Behind me, I heard Mom whisper something sharp and ugly, but I didn't look back. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From the adrenaline of finally saying what needed to be said. As I reached the front door, Hannah's voice followed me. You think you're so righteous, Rachel? Go ahead. Call the cops. See what happens. I didn't answer. Outside, the evening air hit me like a shock. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a wash of violet light over the neighborhood. I stood on the porch, breathing deeply, listening to the muffled voices arguing inside. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my contacts. My thumb hovered over one name for a few seconds, Detective Alan Moore. He'd worked with our firm last year on a housing dispute case. Reliable, direct, fair. When he picked up, his voice was steady. Moore speaking. Alan, I said quietly. It's Rachel Bennett. I need some advice about a trespassing issue. He paused for a second. Who's trespassing? My family, I said. And they're not planning to leave. The line went quiet, except for his soft sigh. Okay, he said. Let's talk. As I ended the call, I looked back through the window. Inside, my family was still shouting the same voices that once made my childhood feel safe. Now they just sounded like strangers. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, whispered to the empty street. This ends tonight, and stepped off the porch into the cool March air. Tuesday morning, the air inside my car felt heavier than usual. I sat in the parking lot outside my office engine, off hands gripping my phone, as the recording played through the speakers. My own voice was calm, but theirs wasn't. I heard my father's fist slam against the table, the sound of a glass tipping liquid spilling, my mother's sharp tone, accusing, dramatic, and Hannah's laughter, high-pitched, cutting through the chaos like a dare. No one in that room thought I would actually do it. They were used to me talking, not acting. When the recording ended, I took a deep breath and scrolled to Alan Moore's number. He'd worked with my firm on a civil case last year, the kind of detective who read the fine print before making a move. He answered on the second ring. Detective Moore. Alan. It's Rachel Bennett. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I need some legal advice. Actually, police advice. About what? My family refuses to leave my property. They've been living in my house for 3 years. I own it outright. I've asked them to leave several times, and now they're threatening me for trying to enforce it. He paused for a second. You're saying they're occupants without consent, guests who overstayed their welcome. I have the deed, utilities, and taxes in my name. Everything. He exhaled softly. All right. Under California state law, if you can prove ownership and they have no lease, you can file a notice to vacate. Once that's served, we can assist if they refuse to comply. I don't want to escalate, I said, though we both knew I already had. I just need to know what happens if they don't leave. Then it becomes trespassing, he said plainly. Do you want me to come by and take a look? There was a long silence before I replied, yes, please. By the time I pulled into the driveway that afternoon, Alan's unmarked car was already there. Another officer, a younger woman named Ruiz, stood beside him taking notes. My parents were on the porch, looking more confused than alarmed. Hannah stood in the doorway, phone in hand, filming. What's going on? Dad demanded, his voice cracking slightly. Alan stepped forward, his tone professional but calm. Mr. Bennett, I'm Detective Moore. Your daughter requested a verification visit regarding property rights. We're here to confirm ownership. Mom's eyes widened. You called the police on your own family. She turned to Alan, her voice syrupy sweet. Officer. This must be a misunderstanding. We've lived here for years. It's our home. Alan looked down at his clipboard unbothered. Ma'am, whose name is on the title deed, I stepped forward holding out the folder I'd prepared that morning. Mine, Rachel Bennett, purchased in 2017, paid off in full 2 years ago. He nodded, taking a moment to verify the paperwork. All right. This property legally belongs to Ms. Bennett. That means continued residence without consent constitutes refusal to vacate private property. Dad's expression hardened. This is a family matter. You have no right to interfere. Alan's gaze didn't waver. Actually, sir, under California Civil Code Section 602.5, refusal to vacate after notice from the owner is a misdemeanor. So yes, we do. Mom's charm cracked. You're seriously siding with her. She's our daughter. I'm siding with the law, ma'am, Alan said evenly. Hannah stepped closer, still recording. Oh, this is gold, she muttered. My followers are gonna love this. Lawyer Sister Evicts. Her family. I turned toward her, my voice quiet but firm. Hannah, if you post 1 second of that, I'll have it taken down before it gets a single view. She smirked. Can't stop the truth. No. I said, but I can stop a lie. Alan turned to me. Ms. Bennett, do you want to give them formal notice now? I nodded. My hand didn't shake as I took the document he handed me, a simple printed notice with the words 24 hours to vacate premises. I placed it gently on the dining table, inside next to Mom's vase of fake lilies. This is ridiculous, Dad barked. You think you can just erase your family with a piece of paper? I looked at him, my voice low but steady. No, you did that yourselves when you decided my life was yours to spend. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but they looked practiced. You're cold, Rachel, heartless. Maybe I said, but at least I'm honest. Hannah slammed her phone on the counter. You're insane. Who does this? Who calls the cops on their parents? I took a deep breath and faced them all. Someone who's finally done being your bank, your landlord, and your emotional punching bag. You have 24 hours. After that, I'll proceed through legal channels. Dad's face turned red. You're making a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your life. I didn't blink. Maybe. But at least it'll be my mistake. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched so long I could hear the refrigerator hum the ticking clock. Even Hannah's shallow breathing. Alan finally broke the tension. We'll follow up tomorrow. Ms. Bennett. In the meantime, everyone's expected to comply. He handed me a copy of the notice, then turned to my father. You have until tomorrow evening to vacate. Failure to do so will result in removal by law enforcement. Dad glared at him. You should be ashamed of yourself. Alan gave a polite nod. Just doing my job, sir. As he and Officer Ruiz stepped back toward the door, my mother clutched Hannah's arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. I caught only fragments. Betrayal, ungrateful devil. Alan paused at the door, meeting my eyes. You all right? I nodded. I am now. He gave me a brief, understanding look before leaving. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving the 4 of us standing in the living room. The same room that once hosted Christmas morning's birthday cakes and family movie nights. Now it felt like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. Dad's glass of wine from the night before still sat on the table. He picked it up, threw back the last sip, then slammed it down hard enough to spill the rest. The red stain spread across the wood, dark and messy like the moment itself. I looked at it for a second, then at them. My voice was calm, almost gentle. "This isn't revenge. It's justice." Mom let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "You wouldn't know justice if it slapped you in the face." I turned toward the door without answering. Behind me, Hannah's sobs filled the silence. Outside, the sky was bruised with late afternoon light. Alan's car pulled away from the curb, leaving the street quiet again. I stood on the porch, the wind brushing against my face, the paper in my hand crinkling softly. For the first time, I wasn't shaking. I wasn't second-guessing. I was standing in the same place where everything began, and realizing that for once, I wasn't the one breaking. They were. By the next morning, the story had grown legs. It started as whispers, neighbors exchanging looks over hedges, colleagues lowering their voices when I walked past. But by noon, it was everywhere. Lydia Harris, my mother's closest friend and lifelong gossip columnist, Without a Column had posted a long, emotional update on Facebook. Her words sat like poison wrapped in sentiment. A daughter who once had everything, education money, prestige, has now turned on her own parents. She called the police and kicked them out. It breaks my heart to see what pride does to people. The post had over 2,000 likes in less than 5 hours. The comments ranged from sympathy to fury. Shameful. Another cold career woman. She probably has no soul. Someone even shared a photo. My driveway, my house with a police car parked outside. The caption on next door read, "Something serious at the Bennett residence." Anyone know what happened? By the time I got to the office, the damage was done. People tried to act normal, but I could feel their curiosity humming beneath the surface. A few avoided eye contact altogether. Others gave me polite smiles that carried more pity than warmth. Jennifer met me at the elevator, her expression careful. "Hey, just so you know, it's all over social media. Someone even tagged our firm in a thread." I felt my stomach twist. Great. When I reached my office, I barely had time to set my bag down before Paula Green called from down the hall. "Rachel, my office. Now." I walked in, shutting the glass door behind me. Paula was already seated, tablet in hand, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. Her expression wasn't angry. It was disappointed, which somehow felt worse. "I've seen the posts," she said quietly. "And before you panic, I've already spoken to PR. We'll handle it. I didn't post anything," I said quickly. "I haven't said a word." "I know," Paula replied. "And you're going to keep it that way. No statements, no comments, not even a like or a reply. The internet will eat itself in 24 hours if you don't feed it." I nodded, but the words barely sank in. "People think I threw them out for no reason. They're calling me." "I know what they're calling you," she interrupted gently. "And it doesn't matter. You did what you had to do. Let the noise fade." Her tone softened. "Rachel, you've always handled yourself with grace under pressure. Don't let this be the exception." I forced a thin smile. "I'll keep my head down." "Good," she said. "Now go home early. You look like you haven't slept in a week." By the time I left the office, I couldn't tell if I felt lighter or heavier. I sat in my car for a while, scrolling through my phone despite knowing I shouldn't. The comments kept coming. "She's unhinged. She probably has borderline personality disorder. I wish I had her courage. My parents have been living off me for years. Good for her. Boundaries aren't cruelty." I turned off the screen, tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, and just sat there. People didn't need truth. They needed a villain to blame, and a story to believe. I'd given them both, without saying a word. When I finally got home that evening, the street was quiet. My front yard looked undisturbed, the curtains drawn. Inside, the house felt different, echoing hollow. The silence was almost alive, wrapping around me as I walked from room to room. The living room smelled faintly of the wine my father had spilled, but the furniture was gone. So were the voices. Only the hum of the ceiling fan broke the quiet. I stood in the center of the empty space, realizing how rare it was to hear nothing. For the first time in years, there was no TV blaring, no arguing, no footsteps above me, just the sound of air moving freely through the house. Then my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. An unfamiliar number from St. Helena Hospital. My chest tightened. "This is Ms. Bennett," a gentle voice asked. "Yes, I'm calling about Margaret Ellis. I'm so sorry to inform you that she passed away earlier this evening. She went peacefully." I pressed a hand to my mouth, but no sound came out. The nurse continued softly. "She asked us to make sure you got the envelope she left behind. It should arrive by courier within the next hour." I thanked her, mechanically hung up and sank into the nearest chair. The grief didn't come all at once. It arrived in waves. First disbelief, then guilt, then a hollow ache that filled the space around me. When the delivery came, I opened the small envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a handwritten note, the ink slightly smudged. "Peace isn't betrayal, my darling. It's survival. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her handwriting was uneven letters trembling across the page. I ran my thumb over the words until they blurred through my tears. I didn't sob like in the movies. The tears just came quietly, one after another, as if my body was finally letting go of everything it had been holding in for months. Years, maybe. I read the letter again, whispering the words aloud, until they stopped feeling like loss and started feeling like permission. When I finally lifted my head, the first light rain of spring was tapping against the windows. The world outside felt softer, quieter, like even the air was mourning her. The phone buzzed again. This time it was Alan. "Rachel," he said when I answered his tone, cautious but calm. "I just wanted to let you know. They're gone. All of them. We supervised the move-out this afternoon. The house is clear." I didn't respond right away. My throat was too tight to speak. "You okay?" he asked. I looked around at the empty room, the faint echo of my own breathing. The silence that used to suffocate me now felt like freedom. For the first time I said quietly, "I think I actually am." He paused for a moment. "You did the right thing." I smiled faintly, eyes still wet. "So did you." After the call ended, I folded Grandma's note and placed it on the mantel. The room was bare, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a beginning, quiet, uncertain, but mine. I turned off the lights, letting the soft hum of the ceiling fan fill the room. The wind outside had picked up, rattling the windows gently like the house itself was exhaling after years of holding its breath. And for the first time in a long time, so was I. 2 months later, spring had already turned the bay into that golden haze where the air smelled like jasmine and asphalt. Life somehow had gone back to its quiet rhythm. I went to work, came home, cooked dinner for one. The house stayed peaceful, exactly the way I'd fought for it to be. By May, most people had stopped whispering about the family incident. A new scandal had taken its place online, and I was grateful to be forgotten. Or at least I thought I was. That morning, as I walked into the office, Jennifer waved a folded magazine at me. "You might want to see this," she said hesitantly. I took it from her, expecting another property case or legal op-ed. Instead, the headline stopped me cold. "Influencer Hannah Bennett, accused of contract fraud. Sponsors pull out. After misrepresentation scandal." There it was. A grainy photo of my sister, tears streaming down her face during a live stream. The caption read, "Apology video, reaches 2.4 million views." I clicked the link Jennifer sent and watched the first few seconds. Hannah sat in front of her ring light, her makeup smudged, her voice trembling. "I never meant to deceive anyone," she sobbed. "I just wanted to make people proud of me. Please don't send hate." Thousands of comments scrolled past. "She's faking it. This is karma." Another influencer who thought lies were content. I shut my laptop. My hands were cold even though the office heater hummed softly in the background. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same internet that had once called me heartless now tore my sister apart. I wanted to feel vindicated, but instead I just felt tired. The internet doesn't forget. It just waits for the next person to fall. That afternoon, while I was reviewing a deposition, my assistant knocked lightly on the glass door. "Rachel, there's someone here asking for you." When I looked up, I almost didn't recognize her. Hannah stood there, makeup-streaked eyes swollen, her expensive clothes wrinkled. She looked small, like the air had gone out of her. I told my assistant to give us a minute. When the door closed, Hannah crossed her arms, trembling slightly. So she said bitterly, "I guess you've seen it." I nodded. "I have." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Go ahead, say it." "I told you so." I wasn't going to. Her voice cracked. "You win." "Okay, you got what you wanted. Everyone hates me. Mom and Dad won't even answer my calls. You happy now?" I leaned back in my chair, choosing my words carefully. "This isn't about winning, Hannah. It never was. I just wanted respect, something our family never gave or understood." She stared at me, mascara still running. "I'm not here for a lecture. I need a place to stay." just for a few weeks until things calm down. I reached into the drawer, pulled out the envelope I'd prepared weeks ago, and slid it across the desk. That's a list of job training programs, housing options, and small business grants. You can start over if you want to. She looked down at it confused. What is this, Charity? I said softly. It's a lifeline, but you have to use it yourself. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. You really won't let me stay with you. After everything, Hannah, I said quietly, I can't save you. Not again. Every time I try to rescue you, you just fall deeper. This time, you have to climb out yourself. Her eyes went wide, full of hurt and disbelief. You're unbelievable. She slammed the envelope onto my desk papers, spilling out. You're the one who taught me to depend on people, and now you act like you're better than all of us. I didn't raise my voice. No, I just learned that loving someone doesn't mean losing yourself for them. She stared at me for a long moment, chest heaving. You really don't have a heart, do you? I met her gaze steadily. I do. It just started beating again after 3 years. Her mouth opened as if to say something, but nothing came out. She turned, grabbed her purse, and stormed toward the door. Hannah, I called after her. She paused. I hope someday you see that this isn't punishment. It's mercy. She didn't answer. The door closed behind her with a soft final click. For a few seconds, I just stood there staring at the spilled envelope on my desk. The papers fluttered slightly in the air from the ceiling vent, lists of opportunities she might never read. Gathered them slowly, folded the envelope again, and placed it back in the drawer. Then I sank into my chair, resting my forehead on my hand. Part of me wanted to chase her, to tell her I'd help one last time, that she could have her old room back, that we could start over. But the stronger part, the one Grandma Margaret had helped me find, knew better. You can't heal people who don't want to stop hurting themselves. The sun dipped low over the city, painting streaks of orange across the conference room glass. I sat there until the office emptied, listening to the quiet hum of the lights, the distant sound of traffic below. Somewhere out there, my sister was facing the same truth I had months ago. That the life you build on someone else's back eventually collapses. And while it hurt to watch her fall, it also felt like closure. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was free. By the time summer rolled around, the world had gone quiet again. The internet had moved on, the gossip threads had died, and my name no longer trended for the wrong reasons. Life had finally become still. But stillness never lasts long in my family. One humid afternoon in July, my phone buzzed while I was drafting a brief. The caller ID made my stomach clench. Mom. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me hesitated. After a few rings, I picked up. Rachel, her voice trembled softer than I remembered. I wouldn't call if it wasn't serious. I said nothing. Your father. She paused, exhaling shakily. The IRS reopened his tax case. They froze his accounts. He can't access a cent. My throat tightened. You mean the case he closed in 2020, the one he swore was handled? They said there were discrepancies. She whispered, I don't understand any of it. They mentioned fines, penalties, $40,000 or more. We don't know what to do. We need your help. I looked at the framed photo on my desk, the one of Grandma Margaret, her eyes kind but firm. Her handwritten note was still pinned beside it. Peace isn't betrayal. It's survival. Mom, I said quietly. Dad has a tax attorney. He doesn't need me. There was a stunned silence on the other end. You're a lawyer, she finally said, her voice cracking. How can you just stand by? I'm a civil attorney, not a miracle worker, I replied, keeping my tone even. And even if I could help, I wouldn't. Not anymore. You're punishing us, she said, tears audible in her voice. I closed my eyes. No, I'm just done rescuing you from the things you chose to ignore. She sniffled. You sound just like your grandmother. I'll take that as a compliment. Rachel, she said again, her voice breaking. Now, please, your father's not well. He can't handle this kind of stress. I hesitated. But the memory of every late bill, every manipulation, every guilt trip washed through me. He handled it fine when he was using my money, I said softly. He can handle it now. There was a long pause, then a whisper so faint I almost missed it. You're cruel, Rachel. I looked out the window at the sunlit skyline, my reflection faint against the glass. No, Mom. I just stopped pretending cruelty was love. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, the phone still in my hand. Outside, the city moved on. Cars' voices, laughter drifting up from the street. Life kept happening even when yours stood still. A week later, I heard through a former neighbor that my parents had moved into a one-bedroom rental in Fremont. The same church community that once praised them now avoided them. Apparently, Lydia Harris, always quick to follow a trend, had posted a clarification. To be fair, I only repeated what Susan told me. I didn't know it wasn't true. The damage was done. The comments under her post were merciless, so she lied. Maybe the daughter wasn't the problem after all. For once, no one came to their defense. Dad's license as a certified accountant was suspended indefinitely. The IRS levied a $40,000 penalty for tax misrepresentation. Mom started working part-time at a public library shelving books and answering questions for retirees, who probably reminded her of herself. It was strange the way karma didn't arrive like thunder. It came through paperwork, letters, invoices, and frozen accounts. It didn't shout. It documented. Karma doesn't come through miracles. It comes through receipts, audits, and signatures. One afternoon in August, I opened my email between client calls and saw a subject line that made my breath hitch. IRS notice case closed. For a moment, I thought it was addressed to me, but it wasn't. It was misdirected from Dad's old joint contact list. The message confirmed the final penalty, the forfeited appeal, the closure. There it was. The end. Not cinematic, not loud, just bureaucratic closure in black and white. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The hum of the office air conditioner filled the silence. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for them. Another part, the tired, bruised, slowly healing part, knew this was how life balanced its own scales. Not with vengeance, but with consequence. I looked again at Grandma's photo. "You were right," I whispered. The corners of my mouth lifted slightly, not a smile, but something close. Outside, the late summer light poured through the window, turning everything gold. For the first time, the world felt calm again. And this time, it wasn't because someone else had fixed it for me. It was because I'd finally learned to stop fixing everyone else. The new year came quietly without fireworks or noise, just the soft hum of rain against my window and the distant sound of foghorns from the bay. By January 2024, the chaos that had once defined my life felt like a story that belonged to someone else. At the firm, things had changed. My caseload was heavier, but it wasn't draining anymore. It felt purposeful. I had just won a major civil case involving an elderly woman whose trust fund had been siphoned by a manipulative nephew. The courtroom had gone silent when the judge ruled in our favor. For once, the kind of justice I used to dream about had a face, a name, and a heartbeat. A week later, the San Francisco Chronicle ran an article titled, "Attorney Rachel Bennett, the lawyer who used the law to protect family justice." The photo accompanying it showed me outside the courthouse, hair windblown, smiling in a way that didn't look forced. It was strange seeing my name printed beneath the words, "Empowerment Through Boundaries." 2 months later, I was standing on stage at the Women's Legal Empowerment Conference downtown. The ballroom buzzed with the sound of quiet conversations and the click of heels on marble. The sign behind me read, "Boundaries and Legal Empowerment for Women." I took a deep breath and looked at the sea of faces. Law students, single mothers, retirees. Women who had lived through their own wars and come out standing. My voice didn't tremble when I began. For a long time, I said I believed that protecting others was my duty. That saying yes made me good, generous, loving, but I've learned that protecting yourself is not selfish. It's justice. The words echoed louder than I expected. A few women nodded, some wiped their eyes. For a brief moment, I saw my grandmother in the crowd, steady, approving. After the talk, people came up to shake my hand to thank me, to tell me their stories. But the moment that stayed with me came later, when Paula Green found me by the exit, holding a glass of water and wearing her trademark calm smile. "You did good up there," she said, leaning against the wall. "Thanks," I said. "I didn't think public speaking would ever be my thing." She chuckled. "You've been giving closing arguments your whole life. You just didn't know it." We stood there for a moment watching people file out. Then Paula turned to me. "Do you ever regret it? How things turned out with your family?" Her question caught me off guard. I thought about it for a moment. "No," I said softly. "I don't regret the choice. I regret how long it took to make it. 33 years of saying yes when I should have said no." Paula smiled knowingly. "That's a lesson most people never learn." Maybe I said, "But I wish I'd learned it before it cost me so much." She rested a hand on my shoulder. The cost was the tuition, Rachel. You just paid it in a different currency. We both laughed quietly. She was right. That night I drove home under the city lights, the rain turning the streets into rivers of gold reflections. Parked in front of my house and sat there for a while, the silence inside calling me back. I didn't rush to go in. When I finally unlocked the door, I noticed how peaceful the place felt, like it belonged to me again. The scent of jasmine from the small plant by the window filled the room. The framed photo of Grandma still sat on the mantel, her letter tucked behind it. I poured a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table scrolling through my phone without thinking. A new message popped up from an unfamiliar number. I opened it and froze. It was from Hannah. There was no text at first, just a photo. Her in a bookstore uniform, smiling shyly, holding a stack of novels. A small caption followed. I got the job. I can take care of myself now. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, my chest tightening. Then, before I realized it, my eyes filled with tears, not the kind that hurt. These were quiet cleansing, relief, maybe, hope. I typed back one sentence. I'm proud of you. The message showed as read, but she didn't reply. She didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was healing. I walked to my study, sat down, and opened my journal. The same one I'd started after Grandma died, filled with scribbled reminders. Fragments of strength I was trying to hold on to. On a fresh page, I wrote slowly, deliberately. When you stop rescuing people, they start saving themselves. I put the pen down and stared at the words until they blurred slightly through my tears. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air was cool and clean, the city humming quietly beyond my window. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was rebuilding from the ruins. I felt like I was finally home. By 2025, the house on El Camino Real no longer echoed with old arguments or footsteps that weren't mine. It glowed quietly, each morning sunlight spilling across clean hardwood floors, the faint scent of jasmine from the backyard drifting through open windows. The walls, once heavy with tension, now just held light. I woke before sunrise that day the way I always did now. My body had grown used to the stillness, the kind that comes when you've finally stopped waiting for the next explosion. I brewed a cup of green tea, letting the steam curl against my face, and sat by the window as the first soft whiz crept through the blinds. The city outside was just beginning to stir. Cars starting on the distant road, a jogger passing by the world, quietly alive. Inside, everything was exactly as I wanted it mine. On the desk sat the envelope Grandma Margaret had written to me before she passed. The paper had yellowed slightly, but her handwriting remained strong, confident. I read the words for what must have been the 100th time. Peace isn't betrayal, my darling. It's survival. I'd memorized the sentence long ago, but reading it still calmed me. I took the small framed photo of her and hung it above my desk next to the law degree she'd always been so proud of. For the first time it felt right being there together. Her wisdom beside my work. The woman who taught me strength, watching over the woman who finally learned how to use it. I set a small pot of lavender next to the frame. The purple petals glowed under the morning light. Grandma would have liked that. Something living, something growing. As I sipped my tea, I thought about how much had changed in 5 years. The woman who once lived for everyone else no longer existed. My parents were still in Fremont, keeping to themselves. The last I'd heard, Dad was teaching accounting basics at a community center. And Mom had become the quiet librarian people actually liked. Hannah still worked at the bookstore. We weren't close, but sometimes she sent me photos of new book displays or handwritten notes from customers who thanked her for a recommendation. They were small gestures, but they carried peace. And I realized something: I didn't need reconciliation to have closure. Forgiveness didn't require reunion. It just required letting go. The sound of my phone broke the silence. It was Paula. "Good morning, Counselor Bennett," she said, her voice bright. "You're going to love this. The producers of Women in Law want you on their podcast next month. They're doing a series about personal boundaries in legal practice. I told them you're the best voice for it." I smiled. "You told them I'm the cautionary tale, didn't you?" She laughed. "I told them you're living proof that boundaries don't make us cold. They make us whole. They want your story. Then I'll tell it." I said, But I think I'll start with something simple. Sometimes loving yourself is part of your duty. Perfect. Paula said. See you Monday. After she hung up, I sat back in my chair, the phone still warm in my hand. Outside, the sun had risen, completely flooding the kitchen in gold. I thought of how many mornings I'd spent dreading the day ahead, and how different this one felt. Peaceful. Earned. I took another slow sip of tea and looked toward the garden. The hydrangeas had started to bloom again. Soft blue, the color of calm. The wind moved through them like a sigh. I opened my journal and flipped to the last page. My handwriting had grown steadier over the past 2 years, less rushed, more intentional. I wrote, justice doesn't always mean punishment. Sometimes it's just peace, the kind you build when no one's watching, the kind that doesn't ask for applause. They once called it betrayal. I call it boundaries. I set the pen down, breathing in the quiet. The house didn't feel empty. It felt full, of space, of air, of possibilities. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't waiting for approval or apology. I'd built something solid out of everything they broke. The tea had cooled slightly by the time I stood and stretched. The day outside had brightened into that soft California gold that made even ordinary streets look cinematic. I walked to the front porch, letting the sunlight hit my face. Across the yard, the neighbors' wind chimes tinkled in the breeze. I thought about the road that had led me here. The pain, the noise, the endings that felt like losses, but were really beginnings. And as I turned back toward the door, I knew there was nothing left to fix. Just to live. I sat down at my desk again, looked once more at Grandma's photo, and whispered, "You were right." Then softly, the words that had guided me for years formed again in my mind. Now, not as an echo, but as truth. If you've ever been forced to choose between duty and freedom, between loyalty and self-respect, remember this. Peace isn't betrayal. It's justice finally done. The music of morning filled the house. The wind, the city, the heartbeat of a new day, and I let it fade slowly into silence.